Hello everybody, my name is Judith. I'm about to make some bread today and I thought I would take you along and show you how we make bread in Germany, or how I make bread in Germany, because I think there are as many bread recipes in Germany as there are families living here. I'll take you inside and yeah, let's try and bake some bread. See you! So, I've never done a cooking video before, but I think it can't be that hard. So, my hands are clean, I just washed them, which is always very important when you cook in general, but especially when you bake something and you have to knead the dough later. So, yeah, let's get started. I don't have a KitchenAid. They are getting more popular in Germany, but they are still very expensive. I think most people in America have them, but yeah, I can't afford one, so I just use my usual bowl. And yeah, one of the main differences between German bread and, for example, American bread, or also English bread and French bread, is that we use a lot of whole grain flour, and in most breads we use more than one kind of flour. So yeah, I usually use wheat flour, whole grain wheat flour, and also spelt flour and rye flour. But due to the Corona crisis, for some weird reason, people all over the planet suddenly seem to have started to bake bread. During the lockdown, so all the supermarkets everywhere ran out of flour, and we still can't get rye flour. I don't know why it's so popular. Probably because people are cooking with sourdough, and yeah, for sourdough you traditionally use rye flour. I will make a yeast dough instead. And since I couldn't get rye flour, I am mixing 3 different kinds of flours. Let me get them. So this is the usual wheat flour, which is used for most breads in foreign countries like America, UK, France, etc. It's very white, and it doesn't have a lot of nutritional value. It makes you hungry again pretty quickly. So that's why I add some of the spelt flour. The wheat flour on the bottom, that was about 100 gram, which is, if I translated it correctly, 0.22 pounds lb. And from the spelt flour, I take twice as much, so 200 grams, which is 0.44 pounds. And since I couldn't get the rye flour, I have a different kind of wheat flour. You can't see that too well now because I buried it on the bottom, which wasn't so clever. But this one is a lot darker than the white wheat flour because this is whole grain and has a lot more nutritional value, and also gives the bread a more rustique. What's that in English? Rustical? I don't know. I hope you understand what I mean. A stronger taste. So this is the 3 different kinds of flour which I use. And then, of course, every bread needs a bit of salt. That is 30 grams of salt, which is 1.05 ounces according to Google. So, and I just mix the dry ingredients thoroughly before we go on to the fresh or liquid ingredients, which mix separately before they get added here. But what we already can do with your wrist, you make a, no, that's not the wrist, what's it called? Fist, the fist. With the fist you make a little, you know what I mean. Whoop. Little hole. And yeah, we get back to this later. Up. we need a smaller bowl. When I was in America and I wanted to make bread for my friends, I couldn't find fresh yeast anywhere, not even at a Whole Foods shop or whatever the supermarket chain was called. I think it was Whole Food. Yeah, I could only find the dry yeast, which you can get here also, but somehow dough made with dry yeast and me, we don't get along too well. It never works. So I prefer the fresh yeast, which you have to keep in the fridge, and it can stay there for about 2 to 3 weeks before it gets bad. But it doesn't get a chance to get bad here in my household, because I like to make bread and my housemate likes to make pizza dough. So we use quite a lot of yeast. The thing with yeast is that the less yeast you take for a bread, the longer it will stay fresh after it's being baked. So when you use sourdough, you only add a tiny little bit, if at all, of yeast, and it stays fresh for weeks. And if you don't use sourdough, you can still make a bread with only a tiny bit of yeast, but it will have to, do you say rest? Well, to stay at a warm place before you can bake it for a long, long time, like 24 hours or something. So I don't have that much time today because we need the bread tonight. That's why I'm taking 30 grams of yeast, which is my standard recipe. It's 30 grams of yeast, 30 grams of honey, and the 30 grams of salt, which already went into the big bowl. So the honey you need to feed the bacteria. Is it bacteria? It's not bacteria. Hefepilze. I think it's a fungus. Well, the microorganisms in the yeast, they like sugar. So that's not going to be a sweet bread. It's going to be a neutral bread. It does have taste. It doesn't taste neutral. It's just neither sweet nor savory. So you can put all different kinds of things on it, from sausage and bacon to marmalade. It will still taste good. And the honey does too. It's local honey from the next village. They are clients of mine, and they gave me the honey as a thank you after I pet-sitted their cat. And yeah, I try to get local honey whenever possible, because I don't see any sense in importing honey from Mexico, for example, and Brazil. You get a lot of honey from Mexico and Brazil in our supermarkets, and I think it's just stupid, because we have honeybees too and we have flowers too, so why carry it halfway around the world? That just doesn't make sense to me. I will empty this honey bowl and then wash my hands again. I'll be right back, but it's too good to throw away. Mama. So that won't make a good dough, because it also needs some liquid, and the liquid has to be lukewarm, not too hot or you will destroy the microorganisms in the yeast, but not too cold either, because then they get sleepy and they don't work, and you want them to work. So I put a glass of water outside into the sun, because it's a really warm day today, and it should just have the right temperature. I'll get it. One moment. Yep, that's pretty much perfect. I would say it's a tiny little bit warmer than body temperature, so probably around 39 something degrees. I have no idea what's that in Fahrenheit. So this is 325 milliliters of lukewarm water, which should translate to 10.98 ounces, so pretty much 11 ounces of water. Whoops. And then you take this little thing and you stir it until both the honey and the yeast have dissolved. Whoop. Oh, by the way, the flour and the salt and all the dry ingredients, they should have room temperature at least as well. So don't keep them in your coldest room, in your food storage room or something, because the yeast won't like that and you want the yeast to work. So now you can imagine why I made that hole in the bowl, because now it goes in there. Whee! Oops, a little bit of honey and yeast left in the middle. Here we go. And now you just stir from the inside, so you always get a little bit more of the flour, and you mix it. Mix, 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 mix. And you work it all in from the inside to the outside. At some point it will get too sticky to do it with a fork. Then of course you would use your KitchenAid. I will use my electric hand mixer. I don't know if that's what it's called in English, but you will see. So I think by now I should switch to the electronics. Oops. Washing hands again. A lot of hand washing today. So these things are perfect for dough. We also have some that are more closely together, like this one. That's good for making scrambled egg or pudding or whatever. Oh, what's pudding called? It's not pudding in English. It's called custard. Custard is what we call pudding. So, but these are good for dough. And now I have to make some noise. Wait a moment. It's a bit old, the machine, so it's getting a little bit weak if it has to make its way through the dough. The harder it gets, the louder this machine gets, but it's still working and I hope it still does for a while. Okay, you know what? From now on, I think I'll switch to hand kneading, because that would take ages otherwise. So, bread dough is not a sticky dough, at least the recipe I make. It has a really pleasant structure. No, structure is not the right word. We say consistence, but I can't come up with the English word. Yeah, so this, so far until here, is my basic bread recipe. And then, from now on, I can't give you a strict recipe because I always improvise. This is the basic dough, but just bread from just plain flour is a little bit too boring for me. So I'm adding more stuff. I would add 500 grams, so just as much as I have wheat in it, I will now add from semolina. I don't know if you've heard about that. When I was in America, it was an odyssey to get the semolina somewhere. I think I found it at Whole Foods after all, for which I had to walk 3 miles. It gives the bread more bite, more structure. Well, here we go. This is 500 grams of semolina, so a little bit more than 1 pound. And of course, this would get too dry now, so we will also add some more water, almost as much as we already used. If you remember, we used 325 milliliters, so now we will use another 300 because we added almost as much dry material again. I'll be right back. Here we go. So actually, I will be honest to you, this is my first cooking video, so I was a little bit nervous at first and therefore not as concentrated as I usually am. I would usually add the semolina along with the other dry ingredients right from the start, and I honestly just forgot. So usually, since I always use the semolina, I would mix the flour, the different kinds of flour, and the salt, and the semolina right from the start. So now I have to work it in afterwards, which is a little bit of a mess, and the dough gets sticky for a moment, but it won't stay that way after I added more different stuff, for which I honestly don't have any recipes. So now it's sticky. Up. Here we go. It's always hard to get the yeast dough off your fingers, but that's normal. Up. And I'm off to hand washing again. So for the variations, I just check what I have at home at the moment. So today in this case, let's see, I translated all of it. Today I have flax seed, and from whatever I find, I just throw in about a handful. So this is flax seed. Up, here we go. Flax seed also grows in Germany, but for some reason, many people today believe in superfood and buy quinoa instead because it's advertised so much. But flaxseed just has exactly the same effects on your bowels and on your overall health, gut health, as quinoa. So use flaxseed if it grows in your country. Don't import quinoa from halfway around the world, I would say. This is something I'm not quite sure about the right translation. The option is wheatmeal, cracked wheat, or even graham. I hope one of these names means something to you. We call it Weizenschrot. So here we go. You can see. Up. And then we have rolled oats and rolled spelt, but rolled oats on its own is fine too. So I always have a mix of both, and I like a little bit more of that one because it gives the bread a good structure. Then we have sunflower seeds. And last but not least, Oat Bran. This is this. This is has no nutritional value, so it can't be digested, which is good because that's what makes it what we call Ballaststoff, so like ballast. And it feeds the gut bacteria and also keeps the gut in motion. So this is very good. By which I don't mean that you get diarrhea or something. I hope that didn't come across wrong now. It's just very good for your gut health. So I add that too. And now we mix it again. Sorry, Just bumping into the... This looks very good. Okay, some more hand kneading at the end. And then it's ready to go to rest at a warm place. So, look, not sticky anymore. That's how I like my bread dough. So now it has to rest somewhere for about an hour, depending on how warm the place is. And since we have almost 30 degrees Celsius today outside, I would just put it outside and an hour should be fine. Let the yeast do its work. Some people put a plastic cap on top. No, not plastic cap, like plastic foil, wrapping foil, cling foil. What's it called? Well, that transparent stuff you sometimes wrap around leftover food and so on. But we try to avoid plastic here. A little bit sticky, but that's fine. So I just usually use a clean kitchen towel. And also, if you slice the bread a little bit, not deep, just a little bit, it helps the yeast bacteria to work. So I'll do that now. Good sharp knife. Just like that. Hop. Hop. So here's the kitchen towel coming. Good night though, and I'll see you guys in an hour. GoPro, turn off. GoPro, stop recording. The big moment. Haha! Remember the small ball of dough? It has about doubled in size. That's what it's supposed to look like. And I wish you could smell it. Oh, and it's really warm. So the yeast was working very well. Okay, and now that it has risen so nicely, we sadly have to get all of the air out of the dough again. So we do that on a clean surface, which sufficiently is here. And we need flour. Here we go. More wheat flour just to keep the dough from sticking to the surface. Yep, something like this. I might need a little bit more, so I will open that one for better access. So come on. Allez, hop. Whee. Oh, it smells so good. I'm getting really hungry. I only had breakfast today. So we knead it for a while. And yeah, we work most of the flour that's on the surface in, but that's okay. It's not that much. And we also smash it and we hit it with our fists. So that's when you bake a few breads a day, I think you can skip the fitness studio, the gym. It's a lot of work, but the bread needs it for the dough to be smooth. Can you hear the creaking floor, whatever. Yeah, the creaking floor. I live in a 117-year-old barn, so everything is made from wood, and my house has character. It likes to talk. The roof cracks, the floor squeaks when you walk across it. That's just how I like it. Yeah, you basically do that for about 5 minutes. But yeah, maybe we do it a little bit shorter today, because I don't want to bore you watching me hitting my dough for 5 minutes straight. I think that would be a boring video. So I think this should actually do. It feels good. It's not sticky. Okay, so what we do now, because this would be a gigantic bread, and it would take ages to bake. So we will divide this one in two. Roughly, like this. Up. Here we go. And here we go. Are they about the same size? Yeah, roughly. Okay, so let's put these two aside for a second and prepare the baking trays. This one looks ugly, I know, but it is still from my grandma's and it's working perfectly. This one is newer. So we have to line it with grease. So I think you have a spray, like a butter spray or oil spray or something. I just use plain butter and I spread it with kitchen tissue. Kitchen roll. Make sure you also put grease in the corners, because otherwise that's where your bread will get stuck during the baking process and you won't get it out easily afterwards. Yeah, and second one. Oh, if you do it the way I do it with the kitchen towel, make sure it's good quality. No, not kitchen towel. Kitchen paper, kitchen roll. Make sure it's good quality, because we once had a really cheap one, and it started to dissolve into the butter, and then we had all pieces of paper stuck on the baking tray and basically on the bread as well, which was not so yummy. Yeah, so I think I'm done here, this kitchen. Okay. And now this is breadcrumbs. We make them ourselves. I take part in a food sharing corporation, and sometimes they have a big bakery pickup with bread they would otherwise throw away because it's the weekend and it wouldn't be fresh on Monday anymore. So then we get sometimes about 30 rolls or loaves of bread, several loaves of bread. Then we dry it and we just shredder it. And yeah, then we have breadcrumbs. And those are perfect for lining the baking tray because they stick on the butter. And they really keep the bread from getting stuck on the baking tray. So a little bit more here, up. Up, here we go. Alrighty, and now we make a sausage, basically, like this, up, roughly evenly shaped. Yeah, this will have to do. We place it loosely in the baking tray, just spread it a little bit. And now you have two possibilities. Either you slice it again like I did with the dough before, or you don't. But if you don't, then the crust will crack at some point, and you have no influence or no saying on where this is going to happen. So it might look cool if it breaks at the side or at the bottom or wherever, but I prefer it on the top because then you can more easily cut it later. So let's grab the knife again, slice it, hop, hop, and now it has to rest a second time, but not as long anymore, just for about 15-20 minutes, depending on the room temperature, and then it can go into the oven. So I'll be back. GoPro, stop recording. So when the dough has rested for a sufficient time, then it's time to preheat the oven. If you have a baking tray and a baking grid, I would recommend using the tray because it passes on the heat into the bread much better than the grid does. So you put it in the middle of the oven, or if you don't have a middle like me, you take the lower third. So yeah, that's a good place for baking bread. And you put it on 225 degrees Celsius, and I completely forgot to look up what that is in Fahrenheit, so I will blend that in later when I work on the video. So here's 20, here's 220. I think I'll leave it this way. Every oven is a little bit different. Mine tends to be a little bit hotter than the temperature says, so I will go with 220, and yeah, I think that's all right. The preheating is actually important because if you put the bread in without preheating, it will get dark from the outside but still be raw inside, and we don't want that. So now it's time to look what our dough is doing outside at a sunny place. I'll be right back. So now that the dough has risen a second time, it is filling about 1/2 to 3/4 of the baking trays, and now it can go into the preheated oven, 225 Fahrenheit, Celsius. Getting confused already. So what you might notice inside of there is that mug. It just has water inside, and the effect of the mug with the water is that the bread will get a fine crackling crust when it has water while it is baking. So from now on, it's about 20 to 25 minutes depending on your oven, and I usually turn it around after half of the time or after 10 minutes, just to be sure that it gets baked the same intensity from both sides. It is supposed to have a circulating heat, but it doesn't always work that way. So just to be sure, I turn it around after 10 minutes. Yep, and that's when I'll come back to you. So the moment of truth. Let's see. It looks a little bit dark on the top, but I think it's just fine from the inside. Oh, by the way, there are two ways you can test if a dough is done or if it's still too raw and needs to bake some longer. The first one, let me show you. Where are my toothpicks? Here we go. The first one is you use a toothpick, and when you go right in the middle where the heat arrives last, and you pull it out, and there is no sticky dough on it, it's perfectly clean, then it's good. And the other way is by turning it over, allez hop, put it here, and then, don't laugh, you knock on it, and if it sounds like a drum, it's perfect. So listen. I would say that's perfect. Here we go. And of course, Well, let me first get the other one, because if you leave it in the oven and the oven is still hot, it will keep baking and it will get too dry. So I put it on the grid so that it can cool down, because if you put it on a flat surface and let it cool down there, it will get wet from underneath and the crackling crust is gone, which would be a shame. So my granny grew up learning from her granny that you should never eat fresh bread because it would give you a stomachache. To be honest, I think that actually this became a law because when you cut fresh bread, you tend to cut it way more thickly than you would cut cool bread, because if you cut the slices too thin and on a fresh bread, it will fall apart. So you make bigger slices automatically when it's still fresh, and then the loaf of bread is gone in no time. And my suspicion is that in the past, when there wasn't much food around, especially between World War I and World War II, which is when my granny grew up, it became a saying not to cut fresh bread, because otherwise the bread would be gone too quickly and you need it to last. So today, luckily, we have enough food, more than enough food, so I can cut this bread, because believe me, there is nothing better than fresh bread. Look at that. Upsala. Here we go. So this is the perfect crust, and inside, it's super hot, it's steaming, but inside it is hot. It's very fluffy and juicy, and ouch! I will let it cool down for just a second, and while I do that, I'll place that back here, and while I do that, I'll get some fresh made elderflower jelly. So let's put that on the bread. So here's my elderflower jelly. Test this color. Here's the last bit of my butter. Not much, but it doesn't need much. It will melt anyway because it's so hot. I'm telling you, if I'm not already making you hungry, that's simply because you can't smell it. If you could smell it, your mouth would water. It smells so good. So always use a clean spoon to get into the jam, because otherwise it will get moldy. I made that last week. Up. Yep. This is my dinner for today, because now it's too late to call it lunch. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm wishing you all a good day. And if you have any questions, let me know. I will post the recipe in the video description, okay? This is so good. Goodbye. GoPro, stop recording. GoPro doesn't listen to me when I have my mouth full. GoPro, stop recording.